Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, we're going to be talking about mourning with meaning, and we're going to be talking about the impact of a death on a newborn's world. You know, you and I were talking about the show today because we're going to have a guest on whose 6-year-old sister died before she was born. And we started talking about grieving families, and then we got talking about your dad and how they never talked about the fact that his older brother, well, 3 kids, the sister had a brother die, and then his brother died, and he was born, and nobody talked about it.
Right. He was born after the death of his brother. He was born 6 years after his brother died. His brother died during childbirth. And like you said, it wasn't talked about.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there were a lot of expectations on him to be like this perfect kid. And I know that you know that his mom was extremely overprotective and very hard on him as his baby because she was stressed.
Yeah. And I remember we went to the Compassionate Friends one day, and it occurred to me, you could go do a sibling thing. You're a bereaved sibling. He was shocked.
Yeah, I think he was like, wait a minute. I'm a bereaved sibling. I've never, ever thought about that.
Yeah.
I've never even considered that, but it's true.
Yeah. And our guest today, Sarah Volman, and you want to introduce her, had a sister die before she was born. And I love it because she is talking to all of you who have had that happen, who have really never, like Phil, no acknowledgement.
Right, exactly. And it does change your life in so many profound ways. And it changes your parents and the family you're born into because you're born into a family that has had a child die or a sibling die.
Right.
So like you said, Mom, we're going to be talking from mourning to meaning, the impact of a death on a newborn's world. And our guest today is Dr. Sarah Volman, and she is right here. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's always fun to have you on.
So Sarah is a registered board-certified art therapist and a licensed clinical social worker. Her sister died before she was born in a drowning accident at the age of 6 years old. Sarah is a faculty member of the Portland Institute. She is the associate director of the Young Widowhood Project. She maintains a private practice, and she is the author of Born into Loss, Shadows of a Deceased Sibling. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Sarah, what was your sister's name?
My sister's name is Julie.
Talk about Julie and what you know about her.
Okay, so before I was born, Julie was 6 years old. She died obviously very suddenly. She was a healthy, happy kid and went out swimming and died drowned in a lake out swimming in August one day. And she left behind, obviously, my 2 parents, my brother, who was 9 at the time, and then my older sister, who was 1.5 at the time. So she was 6. She was the middle child.
So your brother was 9.
My brother was 9.
And your sister was 6, and then the other sister was 1?
My surviving sister was 1.5.
Now,
yes.
How long were you born after Julie's death?
It was about 1.5 years later I was born.
So fairly quickly.
Fairly quickly, yes.
Would your parents have had another child, or do you not know that?
I've always wondered that, and I remember asking them that when I was a kid, and feeling, I think, concerned about that as a kid. I think they wanted to be reassuring, and they always told me yes. One time as an adult, they told me something interesting, which was, they said, you actually were the only planned child that we had, and they said, my mom, got pregnant repeatedly, and but they told me later the story of my conception, which was after my sister died. Obviously, you can imagine the family was completely devastated.
Now, did they say that? Did somebody say that, or is that your thought?
They let me know that in many ways. They kind of described, being devastated, not really knowing what to do. My father was a professor at the time at Dartmouth, and soon after, he ended up taking a sabbatical. And so the family went for 6 months, and they went to live in Italy for 6 months. Okay. My dad was very hardworking. He was a business professor, also authored many books, and he threw himself into his work and was just kind of like a workaholic. And the story that they told me was that in Italy one night, my mom came downstairs in the middle of the night. My dad was up working in the middle of the night, I think because of his grief, and my mom couldn't sleep because of her grief. And she came downstairs and said, "I want another baby." And then, so So I was the only planned one.
And
so
you were
who
the
knows?
youngest.
And I'm the youngest, yes.
And you were conceived in Italy.
And I was conceived in Italy.
That's
That's got to be a good thing.
Were there pictures of your sister around the house growing up and conversations about who she was and
Yes.
kid? Okay.
Yes, there were. And I know in some families that's not the case. It's really interesting. You guys know I've done some research about this. And so some families it's a secret and the child's never talking about. Some families the child is very, very present, maybe too much so, and is like kind of there's this atmosphere of grief in a family. In my family, my sister, there's a painted portrait of her that was hanging in the house. And she was talked about, and there was a stocking for her that would be hung every Christmas, her Christmas stocking. So she definitely was present.
I wanted to ask you, when you said your parents talked to you, which parent talked to you, and were they together? And that's kind of fascinating. Who told the stories?
They said, oh, your kindergarten teacher said, one time called us up to say, Sarah's inventing another sister that she doesn't have. Because I guess I was drawing this other sister, and the kindergarten teacher didn't know about my sister who had died, but she actually went to my parents kind of confused about why is there this additional sibling and kind of Sarah. So they told me this later, and I thought, wow, that's really a sign. It's interesting for me to get to have a little glimpse into the mind of what I must have been feeling and trying to work through as this 5-year-old, but clearly I was trying to understand and master and make sense of this loss, right?
Well, it's interesting to me because you talk about men throwing themselves into work. When my son was killed, your brother, my husband definitely threw himself into work in a way, but he would go to work and space out, So, men,
Yeah.
I don't want to categorize it completely, but it would be fascinating to me if your father was the one that told the stories, but maybe he was.
I think they both did. They both were pretty open
they
to
were
talk
really
about
open
it.
about it.
There wasn't a parent who refused to talk about it.
Did they do therapy or anything? Do you know how they dealt with it?
Unfortunately, they didn't. What's interesting is I think it was especially hard in many ways on my brother who was 9 at the time, but this was back in the 60s.
Yeah.
So there was such a lack of understanding. My parents didn't do any therapy. What I heard is they took my brother like one time to therapy, and then the therapist said, oh, he's fine.
Yeah.
And my family was not fine.
I'm thinking of a 9-year-old going to Italy, how, and leaving his friends and the support system
Yes.
that he had, and the people who knew about his sister that could give him some support. That's one of the downsides of, leaving the whole scene. When did you know that you wanted to do research on this and write a book on it, and what was it, and what did you think your parents did great, and what would you like to see different?
Yeah, great questions. So I think growing up, like I said, it's interesting for me now to have these little glimpses into what I must have been trying to process as a kid. It's clear to me from what I can kind of piece together that I was trying to process things. I remember kind of as a teenager looking for more information and even looking for a book and just feeling like there was no information and no book and nobody who spoke at all to what someone like me had experienced. Like there was just nothing. And here it is, I became a therapist who specializes in grief and loss, like not an accident, as we know, right? So it's interesting to think also how impactful this has been on my whole life trajectory, on my career, on everything that I focused on. But I remember looking for a book, seeing there wasn't a book, and then really thinking, I need to research this. And so I did research it, and I wrote my very first research article ever, and I had very little background in research. I had a few very kind colleagues who kind of helped steer me, and I kind of had to learn along the way, and I did a research study that's published in the Omega Journal. But I interviewed 25 people who also, like me, were survivors. And so many people said to me, this is the first time I'm talking about this. And is my experience normal? What are other people saying? Because there's nowhere to go for any information.
Now let's clarify this again. The reason you're a survivor is not the same as Heidi having a brother die at 17. This is the baby after the sibling dies.
It's like you didn't know the sibling that died.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is really kind of different territory, isn't it?
It is different territory. And it's interesting, too, to think about because I don't know if I'm sure you guys have seen the literature, but like, for example, some of the literature, there's a great article out there about like very young children or maybe children at birth who lose a parent. And they talk about how as part of their grieving process, those children often have to kind of try to reconstruct who that parent was in order to be able to grieve. Because it's like, I'm grieving for this person who's missing, who's very important, but that I don't have the memories or the connection. Right. So I think it's similar in a way for people.
Did you do that? Did you try to figure out who your sister was?
I did, yes.
And did you feel pressure to somehow fill that void or be the perfect child, or, because you were born after? Or
yes.
As a replacement?
Yes. So as you guys know, there's a term, the replacement child, that often applies to people like me in my position. What I ended up finding and kind of concluding from my own experience and my research is I think often people, it's not either that they are a replacement child or they're not a replacement child, but there's a continuum of possible experiences. And for example, maybe one parent kind of looks to them as more of a replacement than the other. That can change over time. Sometimes it changes after you surpass the age of the child who died and you kind of become more accepted as the individual that you are. But in my family, you asked me what was done well and what wasn't. And there were many things that were done well, and my parents tried to, have a lot of joy in our family, which we did in many ways. One of the things that wasn't done as well was that my sister was referred to as a perfect child. Mm-hmm. And my mother even said, I remember her saying to me, people often say that a parent who loses a child often says that child was perfect, and I just want you to know, I know they say that people say that and it's not true, and just so you know, but for Julie it really is true.
Wow.
And she said even her kindergarten teacher said so. She was a perfect child. And this persisted for my entire life, that, she would refer to her. So I think for myself as well as my siblings who were alive at the time when she died, it was difficult to be growing up and hearing about this child who was perfect.
Mm-hmm. That would be hard. And it would never do anything wrong again.
Yes, and who would never do anything. And you can't compete with a perfect dead
you can't.
6-year-old
That's
child.
That's what I always say about my brother. And we all the siblings, we're always laughing about it. The surviving siblings saying we can't compete.
Yeah.
Because they're never going to do anything wrong.
Yes.
What do you think about the term rainbow child? What is your thought about that?
So that is a term, and I know many people like it and embrace it for various reasons. That is a term that I think is problematic. And the reason being that, so for people who don't know, people refer to rainbow babies as like a baby who's born after a baby has died, right? So it's a baby born after loss. The reason I find it problematic is calling somebody a rainbow baby is very much linking that newborn baby to the death of the one that came before. And even the imagery of it, right? Like a rainbow that comes like after rain, there is something bright that comes. Mm-hmm. It really speaks to the pressure that sometimes people who are born after loss face, that they are supposed to be the ones coming in to brighten up the family, to help the family heal. And these things may organically happen, and there's nothing wrong with that per se. But when there's expectations that are put on somebody who's born after another child who died, and that they're expected to be the rainbow coming after loss, or they're expected to heal the family, that's a really big heavy thing for a child to carry in their family. And, even if it's unspoken, kids feel these unspoken expectations and hopes, and they're very attuned to what their parents and their siblings are hoping from them.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking also of your brother and other sister, this perfect you, a new baby, a new hope comes, and where are they in the process?
Well, that brings up a great point too, which is another thing I found in my research is, so there's the term replacement child, but what I found, which was really interesting, is that many people who were born after the death of a child felt like they were kind of treated like my deceased sibling is perfect. I can never measure up in my parents' eyes. I'm never quite as good. That's very similar in that I'm compared, but I'm always compared as the lesser than. But there's also a group of people who they themselves, as the child born after, become idealized. Mm-hmm. And I kind of coined a term for that, like as the gift child, and that the parents do kind of embrace them as the one who is going to make everything better. And I think obviously it's a little bit better to be seen that way versus the one that's not good enough, but both of them are kind of facing a replacement dynamic. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those kids also kind of lived with this knowledge like, well, I have to live up to this, you know, I'm the one making things better, and if I don't, then I'm going to become the inadequate replacement. So neither role is really ideal for somebody to form their own unique identity without the heaviness of this weight of the loss of their sibling.
Did you feel like your parents were more overprotective of you and your siblings and feared that another child would die?
In some ways, yes. And that's also a very common thing that I saw in the studies. I know that, for example, I remember getting, we had a private swim coach.
We were wondering about the swimming part.
It's interesting too, because, and I saw that a lot of times, that there were in a lot of families, there are a lot of fears about the cause of death of the other. My parents hired this woman. I remember her name was Dorothy, and I remember her teaching me and my sister. We had these private lessons in swimming. So.
Interesting. So they were worried that maybe another child might drown.
Yes. And my father said that there was absolutely no way our family would ever own a swimming pool. Like, that was something that he never, we did swim and enjoy, I actually love the water. So it's not like they kept me away from that, but I remember the concept of living with a swimming pool, that was never going to happen in our family.
Do you know if there was any shame or regret around the death? I mean, a regret, obviously, but regret connected with we shouldn't have gone to the beach, or you know, somebody wasn't around, or how did that play out?
I think that there was a lot of guilt and some blaming between, maybe a little bit, and I think it was very painful. Yep.
Blaming between parents?
Maybe blaming between parents. There was also some conversation that, like, maybe my brother should have been watching better. He was only 9.
Whoa.
So that's really complicated too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. How does it go for you now today with your family and the book you've written, and do they comment on this?
So my parents are both gone now.
Now, was your dad alive when you wrote the Omega article, and your mom?
My mom was. My dad died. My dad knew I was doing the research, and he actually knew I was going to write this book. I talked to him about it, and he was very encouraging about me writing.
Because he's a researcher, a book writer himself.
He's a book writer himself. He was very encouraging. My dad was always very encouraging to me. He didn't live to see the Omega article. My mom saw the Omega article, and it was very interesting. I gave it to her to read it, and I was a little nervous because, again, for many of us, and writing this book too, it made me very nervous because I felt like I was venturing into taboo territory, because in many ways, when you're born after, you feel like you don't have a right to claim the loss, a little bit like how you talked about your dad. It's kind of like, well, am I allowed, and that the family maybe has told you indirectly that you're not, right?
Well, the society does too,
and
right?
Society
it's
too.
Such a
Your family
disenfranchised loss.
It's very disenfranchised. So when I wrote the Omega article, I remember giving my mom a copy and being a little nervous. And it was interesting. She came back and she was very sweet, and she said, "I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud that you did this work. I'm so proud of you," which I was very touched and happy. And the one question she did not ask me was, "What was this like for you?" And that question was not asked, which I also thought was fascinating, because the article obviously was written from a research perspective. I did not talk about myself at all. I talked about all the subjects. I talked about my findings. And she did not ask me, "What was this like for you?"
Yeah.
And was that another way of kind of not recognizing that you also had had the loss?
I think so, and I wonder if on some level maybe it was she didn't want to know, or scary for her to talk about, or I don't know.
I'm sorry.
What comes up for me is that I would say that I would be afraid I might be criticized as a parent.
Yes, yes, and that's part of what's very tricky. And I remember even as I wrote this book, which by the way I co-authored with Joanne O'Leary.
And let me say what the book is: Born into Loss: Shadows of a Deceased Sibling.
Yes, thank you. So as we wrote it, she and I often went back and forth and had many discussions about that, because we're trying to talk about the experience of people born after, but then we also wanted to hold the bereaved parents with a lot of tenderness and care too. And yet at the same time, I wanted to be careful, because there are many books about bereaved parents. There are almost no books about this group. And I didn't want to feel like we had to squash the stories of people born after
Right.
to protect the bereaved parents. So kind of having to hold both things and be sensitive, but I also, it was really important to me that as part of this book, the voice of people born after was going to be heard.
Now, if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking of having another baby, what do you say?
I'm
had a
glad,
child die.
you're asking that, because I want to be so clear that my message, and I know Joanne's message, would never be that we think it's a bad idea to have a baby after loss, and that for many families, people often lose a child and have another child, and it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing for the family. It's a wonderful thing to happen. It can be a successful thing in a family. What I would say, the only thing I would say is that for parents to try to be aware and to try to make sure that they are proactively embracing the new child as their own individual, without, putting things on them around replacement, to be able to take time to grieve, to be able to separate their grief from this new child and embrace the child as their own person versus this person that's coming in to fill a void.
I like that. Do you feel like your parenting has changed because you had a sister die before you were born?
I'm sure that it did. Well, what's interesting is I've chosen to be an adoptive mom, and that was by choice.
As have I.
Yes,
I love
as
that.
have you. We have that in common. And it's something that, I don't know what your story of getting there is, but for me, I remember ever since I was a little girl kind of saying, I'm going to adopt. So it's something that, from a very young age, I felt strongly about and wanted to do. And then as I wrote the book and, throughout my process, I was thinking about it. And it was really as I was writing the book that I started thinking about how it's interesting, because becoming an adoptive mom, I became a replacement subsequent parent. Just as
Interesting.
and I had never consciously realized
I didn't
that.
even
But
think
then,
about that.
yes. So, and I remember when we first got my son, and he was 10 months old, and he was very traumatized to have to be moved from a loving foster family to suddenly being ripped away from them to come to us. And, and I felt like the not good enough mother. Like I couldn't soothe him at first. It was hard for him to attach. It was my maternity leave was very painful and difficult. And I felt like I felt like I was never good enough. And then I realized, like, I'm replacing not only this birth mother, but I'm also replacing this foster mother, and I'm in this replacement role where I don't feel good enough. And I thought, here I am repeating some history unconsciously,
Right.
And then I talked to a therapist friend of mine about this. We were chatting, and she said, well, I wonder also if a part of you was drawn to being an adoptive mom because there's a certain grief that comes with adoption, and you also were born to grief, so you have this certain connection to someone who's adopted, that it's something you understand and can connect to.
I love that. Yeah.
I wanted to say, I think this topic is so important, Sarah, and the reason is because there must be people that you counsel and have counseled that don't even realize the impact and haven't been able to deal with it and put those puzzle pieces together.
That's absolutely true. And what's fascinating too is that as I've talked about this topic, like with my book or presenting, etc., it's fascinating because people come out of the woodwork and it might be like, oh, my dad, or oh, I am a subsequent child, or my husband, or my friend. They come out of the woodwork. There's one woman who I was very good friends with for many years. We didn't know that we had that in common until I wrote this book, and she ended up telling me, oh, I was born after the death of a brother. So it's this secret loss that's kind of hidden. So it's so under the radar.
It is, and until you talked about it originally, I knew about your book. I never thought about my own story, but I had 2 miscarriages before I adopted. So technically my daughter, it was born after loss. I mean, she was born,
Yes.
as not a replacement, but some would look at it like that.
Yes. Yeah. So it's another form of that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know you're an art therapist, and you're working in that area also to help people resolve these kind of losses, which I think kicks into the fact that you were drawing a picture of your sister when you were in kindergarten.
It's been happening my whole life, right?
I love that.
I know.
You've been redrawing that picture.
I have. And it's interesting how powerful images are. So I'll share one story with you guys that it was such a moving experience for me. It's just a very random thing, but it speaks to the power of image to me, which is one time I was opening, I had this vintage, a vintage game, like a vintage board game that, someone gave me, and it was, probably from the 60s or something. And I opened it up and I was going through it, and there were different little symbols in it, and it had different signs, like different street signs. And I pulled one out, and it was a crossing sign with like the silhouette of a boy and a girl. And this may sound strange, but I looked at it and I was hit with this immediate, really strong reaction. And my reaction was, oh my goodness, that's my brother and sister. And this was the vintage crossing sign that must have been on the roads when I was very little, like right when I was born. And so this sounds silly, but it wasn't a question. It was this very strong knowing when I looked at this image. I thought, oh my gosh, this is my brother and sister. And I realized, I said, I must have seen that sign when I was little, and I was looking for her. And I somehow, this little silhouette reminded me of her in some ways. And so I was drawing her in kindergarten, and I was looking for her. And then having this image pop up to me, this old street sign image, all these years later, I realized I had this connection to it. It was very powerful.
Yeah, so interesting how things come back. Well,
Yes.
how can people find you? And your book's on Amazon, I assume.
My book is on Amazon. They can certainly find me there. Yes.
Okay, and,
Yes.
and you have a website.
I don't.
Okay.
If you Google
But if
Sarah
you Google me,
Volman,
Sarah Volman, I have an unusual name. You will definitely find
I
me.
Googled you last night.
You
You're
did?
all over the internet. So we can find you.
Okay, I am very reachable. I am very reachable.
Awesome. Well,
Yes.
we want to thank you for being on the show today. And if you've got one piece of advice for someone in this situation, what would it be?
Oh, thank you for asking. I would just say, just so important to kind of look at and acknowledge what it might mean for you, because I think, I think it's really fascinating what you were saying about your dad, and that he was surprised when all of a sudden you're saying you are a bereaved sibling, and it speaks to how little people are often able to own this experience or kind of see what it means to them. So to be able to kind of sit and think back, and also, if your parents are still alive, to take the time to ask questions while they're still here. I've worked with people who started looking at it after their parents died and really regret not being able to talk about it. So being able to ask questions to family members, to put pieces together for yourself, I think is really, really important.
Well, thank you for being on our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for building awareness for this topic.
Thank
And
you.
we want to thank everybody for joining us on the show today and say, if you've lost hope, please lean on ours till you find your own, and God bless.